Hello everybody, and thank you for once again coming to the channel and watching this next video. So today we're going to be talking about motion platforms. Now this is the DOF Reality H3, and this is going to be sort of a pitch for the DOF Reality, but it's going to go far deeper than that. In this particular video, as motion platforms become more and more common and more available to the general public, we're going to be talking about the good, the bad, the ugly, and the in-between for motion platforms and the things that you don't get told very often, and the difficulties and tribulations that you may run into, and things to be considerate of when thinking about getting into motion platforms, because I will tell you it is far more intense than what even I have expressed here on the channel and what you would find on other channels. So stick around.
If you are interested in any of my tutorial guides for Microsoft Flight Simulator, or simply interested in supporting the channel, consider joining me on Patreon. Patreon subscribers level tier 2 and above have access to all of my guides, as well as any future guides that come down the road. Patreon link can be found in the description below.
All right, folks, so we're going to break this down into a few different sections. First, we're going to be talking about the motion platform and my experience over the last year and a half of using one on and off, and then why this has now become my primary platform and how I made that possible. We're also going to be talking about the different types of motion platforms and what might be best for you. We're going to be talking about both hardware and software considerations, and we're going to be obviously talking about the price. And we're going to be talking about your environment, as well as considerations such as space, weight, and balance. So let's go ahead and get started. First, we're going to be talking about the different types of motion platforms. All right, so you have a couple different types of motion platforms. As I said, this one here is the DOF Reality H3, which is an absolutely fantastic platform. But you have a couple of different types. This one is a standalone moving rig. It's a self-contained motion rig. Now, what does that mean for me? What that means is that this platform moves on its own and you attach everything to it. And that's important to consider because there are other platforms that you attach to what you already have. And we're going to get into that. So in this particular scenario, and we're going to be talking about the costs and all of this later on, so bear with me. But in this particular scenario, the rig itself, take the seat off, take the throttle off, take the wheel off, take all the peripherals off, and that's what comes in the box with the DOF Reality H3. Then you have hydraulic lifting systems. Okay, at least that's what I'm calling them to keep things simple. And the most common that I have found, you have 4, 6, and I think I even seen an 8-point, but the 4 and 6 are the most common that I have seen, is hydraulic lifts that are mounted usually, again, on between 4 and 6 points on an existing rig. So for example, you guys have seen before on this channel, and if you're not, I'm sure you're familiar with it, the Next Level Racing Pro Flight configuration, meaning the Pro Flight seat and the Pro Flight stand. They bolt together to make one solid rig. You can take those 6 hydraulic or 4 hydraulic points, mount them to the corners, take the wheels off of the rig, and now you have a motion platform. The last piece that you can do is what's called a seat mover, which is exactly what it sounds like. Everything else is static except for the seat, and the seat is the only thing that moves. Now, which one's going to be best for you? Let's talk about the differences in the experiences of those particular types of platforms. 2 of the 3 I have had the pleasure of trying for myself at various locations. So the different types of motion platforms. Once again, this is the DOF Reality H3. Now, what does the 3 means? 3 axis. This one can pitch, it will roll, and it has yaw or traction loss. Where, for example, the ones that we talked about before, the hydraulic lifts, they have pitch, they have roll, and they have lift, right? So they can go actually up and down. But what they don't have is the traction loss. So you lose the yaw effect. So it really depends on which one that you're wanting to go to. An example of these is when I am racing or even flying in an aircraft and we kick into the yaw. I did a live stream yesterday in the Cessna 414 that you guys can go check out, where I was playing around with the rudder pedals and the entire rig would move as the nose of the aircraft would move when I was engaging the rudders. Same thing with as I was taxiing onto the runway and I would make that left turn or whatever it may be, the rig would also move with it, creating a really awesome sensation. And we're going to also be talking about the differences between 2D and VR, so stick around for that. So now what it doesn't have, and I have gotten to try at a Flight Sim Expo before, is the 6-point configurations. And this is where, for something like a helicopter, is absolutely phenomenal. Is that ability to do your hover test when you first pick up off the ground and you're in virtual reality and you feel your screen, or you see the screen in the sim, you start to lift up, you actually feel yourself leaving the ground because you have that ability. Same thing as you set back down. One of the really cool things to do in one of those hydraulic platforms is landing a helicopter, because if you do it just right, where you set the tails of the skids down and then come forward, you actually feel that dong dong, and you get that legitimate feel of what you would experience inside of a helicopter. So it really depends on what you're going for. But again, it's not to say that one is necessarily better than the other. And it's not that they can't simulate to an extent that yaw effect. And I believe there are some out there that can do something similar, but again, not quite in the same fashion that you're going to get with something like this. In my personal opinion, something like this is a better scenario for what we do primarily on this channel. For flight simulation, I would recommend something like the H3 or better. Even the H2, I can still recommend it, although I think, again, in flight and driving simulation, you're going to want that yaw effect. You're going to want that traction loss. Okay, so as you start deciding which direction you want to go, those are the things to be considerate of. Now, what's the disadvantages between the two different configurations? The advantages between the two different configurations when it comes to your build. A disadvantage to this one is you have to buy all of your mounting peripherals separate. For example, the HOTAS mount is an extra $120. That's going to be for your stick and your throttle configuration on the other side. Okay, where on the 6-point hydraulic system that we were talking about, or 4-point, whichever one you end up going with, you use your existing rig as long as it is within inside the weight and relatively balanced, and we'll talk about balance and weight here in a little bit. You'll be fine. So that is an advantage, that you don't have to buy any new hardware or do any kind of goofy customization. So those are all things that you're going to want to consider as you start to get into this, but we are barely scratching the surface. So stay tuned, because there's some pros and cons to both, which is why I have stuck with this. And my big cockpit that you guys have seen before is currently out in the other room. We'll talk about why in a minute. So, we've talked about the different types. We've talked about the pros and cons to each, but now let's talk about a little bit more into the pros and cons of configuration. And that's why I wanted to make this a new section. One of the things that I am absolutely missing about my other rig that's out there is all the customization that I did to it. For example, the swinging door, the different rails that I made for it, the whole left panel that I built for that. And that's something that I have to consider and think about how I'm going to incorporate into this all over again. It was far easier to set my bigger rig up than it is with this one. Again, you have that restriction of weight. Now, the newer models, as I have stated from DOF Reality, they have upgraded motors. It's an upgraded platform. There's far more customization options as far as configuration of height, distance, rails. Like I said, the motors are stronger, so they have a higher weight limit. This one currently has a maximum movable weight limit of 330 pounds is what it's rated for. Now, if you have one of the older ones, you can go and you can buy the upgraded motors from them, but I just don't have the ability to do that right now financially. So those are things to think about. Where my rig out there, my next level racing platform that you guys have seen previously on this channel before, that has everything all nice and laid out, well, that's where the 6-point moving system would be an absolute stellar adjustment. But the problem is then I would use my yaw or lose my yaw. So when it comes to configuring things, you have to decide, are you willing to start from scratch? Now that's where I'll tell you though, there's things like this is an all metal frame. So once again, I am a proponent of metal versus the aluminum extrusions. I don't think that the aluminum extrusions are the way to go. You can make them just as strong with metal and just as light. They're only using 16 gauge here for most of this metal. And for those of you who don't know, 16 gauge is very, very thin. I'd say it's 1/16 of an inch thick. Okay, and that's pretty damn light. But the nice thing about metal is that you can weld to it, you can shape it, you can twist it. Now, I have not modified anything physically on the rig, but I have created new mounts for it on both sides, mounts that have 3 different points where I can simply slide another piece in, tighten it down, and I'm able to swap this out very, very quickly. For example, if I want to take that ATS accessories box off, I simply turn one screw, slide that out, set it down, and put something else in or leave it off. Same thing with my Moza mount here. It has 2 screw holes on each side that I created the mount for this right here, and I simply untighten those, slides the whole thing out. I can slide, as long as I keep that same pattern, slide something new in, which you're going to see tomorrow, and bam, I'm back off into the races. But these are things you have to think about. Do you have the know-how? Are you willing to learn know-how? Now, the one thing about the know-how that I do want to say, guys, YouTube. You can learn anything nowadays on YouTube. Like any trade, any DIY, it's out there. Even welding, the welders for your average Joe who's just doing some little tinkering around on the weekends in your garage, you do not need a $500, $600, $700 welder. You do not. Okay, this kind of stuff, you're not holding up the Titanic. You're holding up a few pounds at best. Okay, so be thinking about that. You don't have to be a pro to do this. So I want to emphasize that because I don't want that to be a steering point to get people away. I want to see more of you guys jump into the DIY and getting into this stuff on your own so you can really expand your flight simulation or driving simulation, whatever it may experience, and customize these builds the way you want, because I'm telling you the power is there. And you have the power! Okay, so anyway. So customization is something to think about, and the ease of that customization is something to consider. I have decided to move full-time to this rig, and I'm going to continue to develop it and move it on until I get it set up the way I want. I am going to figure out some way to create another arm once again where this whole side will swing out, allowing for easy access in and out. So let's get into that. Let's get into comfort. All right, so speaking to comfort, most of that comes down to the seat. This shouldn't be too long of a topic here, but the big thing that I'm going to tell you is that I am 6'1", I'm 257 pounds, and it is a you-know-what for me to get my big ass into this thing, okay? And I'll be more than happy just for a moment. Now, it's not too bad right now because I have this side completely off, but keep in mind, if I was doing a flight simulation setup, which I'll show you guys real quick. Now, I'm obviously not going to lock it down, but this is what I was talking about earlier. You guys can't really see what this is yet, but you'll get the gist. So now that I have a throttle here, things have changed for me. So now, even with the seat all the way back, I have to sort of come in here, get down, and swing my leg up over the throttle, right? So here we go, up and over. And that's with the seat all the way back, right? And you guys can hear me, I'm winded, I'm fat, what do you want? Okay, so, and then to get out, it's the same principle. Got to step out. They're not fun to get in and out of. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to sugarcoat that at all. They are not fun to get out of at all. In and out of. They're just not. So that's something else you have to think about is mobility. If your current rig or current configuration is much easier to get in and out of, and it's something that you have to consider, you know, hopefully you're in better shape than my big ass is, and I'm working on it, but as you guys can see, I've got a ways to go. Okay, but that's something definitely to think about because it is difficult, and it does, and did for a long time, really hinder my desire to engage with it. I think one of the bigger things that got me back into this and got me willing to use it was that I have, and this isn't a boast or anything, it's something I genuinely want you to consider. At the January 1st of 2024, I was 305 pounds, okay? And at that time, and especially going before then, where I was even a little bit higher, not much, but a little bit higher, this thing was far more difficult to get out of. And remember what I told you about the weight limit, okay? I was already pushing it. I was pushing that weight limit. And so I think that's part of the crinkling and crankling and some of the noises and the experiences that I had with it was I think I was pushing the maximum. So now again, that maximum has gone significantly higher since this version. So that is something to be considerate of as well. But when it comes to comfort and ease of access, your next level racing rigs and things like that, you're probably going to have a better time getting in and out of, and or your aluminum extrusions configurations, you know, the GTs and whatnot. So be thinking about that as well. You know, you have to be thinking about getting in and out of the damn thing. Now, as you guys saw initially, I got to hide this real quick. You guys aren't allowed to see this yet. You're not allowed. So with that out of the way, though, so for example, if you're a driver, it's very easy. All I have to do is turn and sit, and I can swing my legs over. So with only one side configured, it's a breeze. Now, the other reason why that I have that configured the way it is if I want to, what I can do is I have my cables long enough, and this is what I've been doing with that one, is I will take the throttle out, hold it, sit, and just slide it back in, and then just tighten down my tightening nut, right? So there's ways around everything that you want to think about. But comfort is something that I did want to address because it can be difficult, especially if you are someone who may be physically struggling. Maybe you've got weight issues like myself, or some other physical pain or something like that, or debilitation that prevents you from being able to move freely into something like this. I'm not going to lie. And one of the other sore spots for this particular rig is that it has 45-degree angles right here that are sitting like this, that if you don't get your leg up and over them, they can be sort of difficult to get your legs into place. All right, so the next piece I want to talk about is setup. So let's say you've made your pick, you've got everything set up, you've got your hardware ready to roll, and man, you are ready to jump in and fly. Well, it's not that simple. You have two different options right now that are the primary options. You may have more out there, but these are the two that I'm currently aware of. By default, when you purchase one of these, you do get a license from Sim Racing Studio. The Sim Racing Studio software platform has been around for a very long time and has been heavily used for motion configuration. Keep in mind, you always have to have a middleman. The telemetry that is being received from your simulator or game then has to be processed by a software such as, in this case, Sim Racing Studio. And I'll give you guys the alternative here in a minute. And then Sim Racing Studio then sends that information over to the DOF Reality in this particular scenario, or any other motion platform. Like I said, it's used in multiple platforms. But then it's transferred over to this equipment and tells it how to move. Now, it's not that simple because you can configure everything. You can tweak everything: axis limits, speed, intensity, how fast it moves, how hard it moves, when it vibrates, when it doesn't vibrate, if it's shaking too much. Just like a force feedback, for anyone who's ever used anything with force feedback, you got a whole bunch of settings and shit you can tweak. Pardon my French. It's the same thing with this, only I would say more intense, because it's a lot more difficult to get this thing dialed in the way you want it, especially if you're new to it, and based on the game or simulator you are playing. And then, to put another twist into it, based on the aircraft you're flying in this particular situation. So here's where we have a couple of different options. So first off, you have Sim Racing Studio, which again is an absolutely fantastic application. It has been around for a very long time. There's a ton of cloud-based profiles that are already created by other users that you can download. But you have a couple of things that I don't like about Sim Racing Studio. Number one, it's a yearly subscription. Then for the motion piece of it, you have another yearly subscription that you have to buy for it. So that I don't like, okay? So that one kind of drives me nuts. But then you also have SimHub. SimHub recently, in the last few months, has gotten into the game of motion simulation as well. SimHub is an application. For example, what SimHub does is it controls these screens for me. Okay, these are my gauges for when I'm driving. SimHub allows me to create custom gauges and things like that that will show up and display on the screen, so it makes it really nice and fun. SimHub also now does motion as well as motion compensation, which we'll talk about in just a minute when we talk about 2D versus 3D, so stay with me. So with SimHub, you still have to purchase the software and you still have to purchase the motion aspect of it, but as far as I can tell, if memory serves, because I have it, it is a one-time purchase, one and done. And the one thing that I will say, again, this is not meant in any way to bash Sim Racing Studio. Please do not take it like that. It is not meant like that at all. But at the moment, I would say that SimHub is better. The customization options are better. The responsiveness seems to be better from the rig. The rig seems to be smoother and more cleanly operating than what it does under Sim Racing Studio. DOF Reality, if you happen to see this, I recommend that you guys take a look into SimHub. And again, that is not to shoot down SRS, or maybe get with SRS and talk to them about the differences. I think that would be a really great starting point. But with SimHub, you have tons of options. So first off, with the gauges, this is just the sort of outside of motion simulation for a second, but bear with me, you understand where I'm going with this. With SimHub, you sort of have a one and done now. So with SimHub, you have the motion compensation, which Sim Racing Studio has as well. You have the motion activity itself, which Sim Racing Studio has as well. But the other thing that you can do with SimHub is all kinds of different third-party displays, softwares, air blowers, which Sim Racing Studio also has a lot of that as well. But SimHub just, to me, comes up a bit higher as a one-and-done platform because the motion that is put into this piece of equipment seems to be smoother and much cleaner in the telemetry activity. But you still have to dial it in per aircraft, per racing simulator, whatever it may be. Now, Sim Racing Studio has the ability to dial in based on aircraft as well, but it is not quite as easily done as it is with SimHub. SimHub, it is very, very clear. The user interface is very intuitive and very easy to navigate around. But again, with Sim Racing Studio, that ability to dial it in per aircraft is there. You can do it. I want to stress that. Okay, so. But the software is something that no matter which one you pick, you're definitely going to have to take some time in. And it can be frustrating. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to hide that part. It can be frustrating. It can be daunting. It can be confusing. There's a lot of words and nomenclature inside of motion simulation that you're going to be learning and understanding how the telemetry works and the difference between yaw, pitch, roll, surge, boost, all of these different things that you have to start getting into, and then understanding how they are being impacted and being actuated, especially with something like this, where you think it's as simple as only setting 3 axes. What could be difficult? You have 3 axes. I have roll, I have pitch, I have yaw. What is hard to set? It's not that simple. You can simulate with the combination of all 3 axes. You're able to simulate other actions as well, and that's where it starts to get daunting and a little bit cumbersome to get set up. But once again, once you dial it in, once you take the time and you've gone through the growing pains and the sweats and the tears and the launching, baby seal across the fence, you'll be really happy with what you end up with. And it's a really fun experience, right down to lately for me driving an American truck simulator. I've had a blast with it on this thing because it's just something cool. You're in that big old rig, and when the Jake brake, if you're coming down a hill, for example, for me, and I'm just cruising, you can feel the bumps in the roads, and I start coming down a hill, and all of a sudden I see that hill starting to make a real steep turn or something like that. Fire that Jake brake, and it literally just pushes your face right into the screen, as a real Jake brake would, especially if you're deadheading. If you don't have a trailer, a Jake brake will put you right through the windshield, depending on what it's set as. So, things like that will make it all worth it. It's sort of like for anyone who's a golfer. Do you remember when you first started learning how to golf? You remember how frustrated it was? You would go out there and you'd shoot 147 balls and none of them would land on the golf course. But then you'd get that one stroke, that one fireball that you'd crank that son of a gun. It'd go straight down the freaking fairway, right down past the moon, hit Santa Claus as he's coming over and drop in the freaking hole. And that one shot would make you want to do it all over again. If you're a golfer, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so that's sort of the same thing with this. Once you get it dialed in, the nice thing though with this, something like this, is you don't have to worry about doing it again after that, right? Once you get it dialed in, you're dialed in, at least for that aircraft or that particular simulator. So, talked about the growing pains, we talked about the different options, we've talked about the pros and the cons of this configuration versus something like the hydraulic lift. Now let's talk about 2D versus 3D and how they're going to change your game. Okay, so now we're getting into it. We're getting close to the end here. 2D versus 3D on a motion platform. I will tell you right now that I have what's called the Golden 3 right now. Actually, I have a Quadro, if you will. I'll tell you what the Golden 4 is. Actually, let's just call it the Golden 4. If you can combine haptic feedback, something like a butt kicker, okay? If you combine a force feedback yoke or stick, something like the Moza AB9 force feedback, and something else that I'm going to show you tomorrow. If you combine that with motion platform and virtual reality, you have what I would consider to be the ultimate immersive experience. I guess I'll throw one little bonus item in: sound. If you have some sort of great sound system, you combine all that together, and absolutely nothing is going to top that immersive experience, except for maybe some air blowers to simulate wind, right? So, motion platform and virtual reality, absolutely the best of friends, best bed buddies. They're just absolutely cool dudes, right? You're not limited to that, because here's my counter to that. And I was talking about this yesterday in my live stream. Before these three big boys, these are 50-inch screens. Before them, I had three 28-inch screens that I had for a very, very long time in a triple monitor configuration. It was cool, but I never got the experience that I get from the large screens. And here's what I determined as to the reason why. This motion platform, even with these triple screens, is a phenomenal experience, whether I'm flying or driving. And I think the reason being is because your field of view is much more realistic to what it would be in the real world. It's not quite there. Like, I've seen people go as far as 65-inch screens, and they're probably the ones who are the closest to nailing it down to what it would really be, a more authentic view of what you would get in the real world. But this, even with these 50s, the nice part is if I want to look out the window, I actually have to turn my head almost a full 90 degrees as you would if you were driving your car and look out the window or flying your plane. So if you are going triple large screens is the kicker. I think you'll have an absolutely fantastic experience. And these screens are stationary. They are not attached to the motion rig. Oh my goodness gracious, I couldn't even imagine. Okay. Virtual reality will still always take the cake to an extent. My problem with virtual reality is, and some people can do it, and don't get me wrong, I've done it before, where they can rock that VR headset for hours and hours and hours. And it's not that I can't, it's just that the one thing that always takes me out of a virtual reality immersive experience is feeling the headset. Like, you can feel it, right? So as cool as it is, and it's sort of one of those things that comes in and out, right? As you dive in and you're comfortable and it's, you're not sweating or it's not pinching your face or any kind of way, or you don't have an itch, you're fine. That virtual reality experience is stellar. But then if you get something real quick that takes you out, or you got to readjust it or whatever like that, it takes you back out for a second, where this is just a constant, the same environment all around. And there are other things that you can do with something like this. Like, for example, one of the things that I'm going to be working on tomorrow is creating essentially a roof for this platform to further seal off the environment and create that completely encapsulated and enclosed environment where I am isolated from the rest of the world. Okay. And by doing so, you're going to create that mental immersive experience that pulls your brain into just what you were seeing on the screens and out of the fact that you're in the office or in your room, wherever it may be. So when it comes to virtual reality, though, there's a kicker here that we were talking about earlier. VR, the thing that you have to think about is what's called motion compensation. Now, yes, it exists in both Sim Racing Studio as well as in SimHub. You do not any longer need, I actually still have the physical piece of hardware. It's actually sitting right there. It's a little box about yay big that you can get, which works a little bit better than the software version of it, but the software still it's come eons since the last time I used it, and it works fantastic. But motion compensation is another piece to the software side that you're going to have to tweak. It is not plug and play. You're going to have to tell the sim or the software what your seat height is, what your center point is, what part of it is moving. Now, here's why. What happens in VR, okay, in VR, what is one of the things that you can do? If you're sitting in your cockpit and you go to do like this, what happens to the camera? You go out the window, right? So without motion compensation in virtual reality, when the seat moves, and this is any motion platform, does not matter. Doesn't matter which one we were talking about. If it moves, your VR is moving, your head is moving in the sim. But the sim doesn't know that. So without motion compensation and taking the time to set that up as well, what's going to happen is as the seat moves, well, it doesn't know that your head is moving. So the VR thinks it's still in the same spot, so it's moving. And so what ends up happening, like if I turn left, if I go into a left bank, okay, my head is actually going to come this way on the cockpit, and depending on the degree of bank, you can find yourself all the way in the co-pilot seat. Okay, same thing when you are pitching down. Well, when you pitch down, your physical head's going to come forward. The sim does not know that the seat is moving, so your camera goes into the dash, right? So motion compensation, what it does is it says, okay, I know the seat is moving. He's in VR, they're in VR. I need to keep the VR headset right here in line with the aircraft as the sim moves. But again, it's something that you have to configure. It is a growing pain. It's another one of those things that can actually be, it's gotten better, significantly better than it used to be, but it's one of those things that still can be a pain in the ass. I'm not going to hide that part. It can be frustrating to try to get it right. And then if you change rigs, change headsets, If you change your seat position, things like that, those are things that, once again, you may, not necessarily always, but you might have to adjust that once again. In something like DCS, if you're flying a single seat fighter, it's a real pain in the ass. So you have that. And by the way, the same thing when you're going aft, right? As you're picking up and you're leaning back, you're going to go further away from your console, even though you are actually physically not moving, right? But like in DCS, if you're rolling from left to right, your head, because you're in a single seat cockpit in a fighter, your head's going to go out the window 9 times out of 10, okay, depending on the degree of bank. Let's talk about that for just a second, degree of bank, because there is something that I do want to touch on. It's not a huge deal, but it is something that might be an issue for some. I think this thing shines in driving, racing, and general aviation or commercial aviation. It is still, or a helicopter, any kind of helicopter. Helicopter, actually, it's a freaking blast. It's a ton of fun using this thing in a helicopter. But one thing to consider is in a fighter role aircraft, something like DCS World. And you do get used to it. It is still fun. It doesn't take the fun away from it. It's just something that sort of kicks you out for a brief second of that immersive experience we're talking about. If you're doing something like an aileron roll, okay, and a lot of people mistake these for barrel rolls. Aileron roll is, this is my plane. I am rolling on my ailerons a full 360 degrees. This can't do that. And this is not a fault of this motion platform. This is any motion platform. There isn't unless you are on a motion platform that has a big giant pendulum that you're sitting off the ground and it can actually rotate 360 degrees without your head hitting the floor. It does not matter which motion platform you pick, you're going to experience this. But this is something I want you to be aware of. If I go to do an aileron roll and I roll to the right, when the seat reaches that maximum rotation angle and I start coming back around the other direction, so I've gone inverted and now I'm starting to roll back around this way, the seat's going to very quickly rotate to this side and then follow that turn back into the level position. So it's just something to be aware of. It's not the end of the world. And it's simulated pretty well. They really do a good job with it. Again, the 2 platforms that I've had the opportunity to try out, this one and I think it was a Next Level Racing one. Anyway, I don't remember actually who the other one was. It was at a FS Expo years ago, the first one that I went to in Vegas. But, excuse me. Anyway, that is something to be considerate of. And it's just one of those things that I don't really ever hear anyone complain about it, but it's something that is noticeable. And I just want you to understand what you're going to feel and experience. And it is the same thing with a barrel roll. Okay, as you pull up, and as you come back down, the nose is going to pitch down real quick. And then as you continue to pull back and go into that level of flight, it'll level back down again. So, things to think about, right? Those are just things to consider as we go through this. So, the final piece to this that I want to talk about now is price. The big one, right? Stick around. So remember when virtual reality first came out, everything was expensive, and they've gotten just as expensive now. People look at the price tag of a motion platform and they about shoot a brick, right? And that's because, for example, if you wanted to buy the motion or the H3 motion platform right now from DOF Reality, it's right around $3,000. But before everyone loses their mind, I want you to think about something. How much was your VR headset? How much was your video card? How much were all of your flight peripherals that you currently have? Okay, and this is either, and if you're not at that price, you're not at that price. My point is, you can save for it. And these are things that are worth saving for. They're things that are worth reaching for if you want to get that ultimate immersive experience. And again, I totally get it. I cannot stress enough that without you guys, for me, it wouldn't be an option. As a single father, 3 kids, nope. At least at this stage right now. I mean, yeah, I could probably save for it. It would take a long time for sure. For sure. Okay. But I just want you to think about it. And the reason why I'm bringing up the cost of everything is not because you can save. It's because of thinking about how much everything is. So when you think about the fact that your HOTAS was $600, when you think about the fact that your VR headset, depending on which one you have, could have been anywhere from $800 to $1,500. When you think about that video card that is $2,200 or higher now, gosh, if you bought a 50 series, mercy. So as I point that out, just understand that when you compare it to everything else, it's not as expensive as it sounds. There are some And that's why I am saying go with DOF Reality. DOF Reality, you can get a seat and a HOTAS set and this for right around $3,500. Okay, so that is something to consider, where some of the competitors, like on the 6-point hydraulic systems we were talking about, could be as high as $5,000 and $6,000. Okay, and that's just for those hydraulic lifts. You already have the rig, and you have to already have the rig in order to use those. This is a self-contained unit. Okay, you attach everything to this, where the other motion platforms you attach to what you already have, which means you also have to check for compatibility. So, something to think about there. I'm not going to touch on the pricing too much. I just want you guys to think about that it is in reach. They are not as out of reach and out of possibility as you used to think. The last thing that I'm going to talk about real briefly is I'm going to give you guys some dimensions here. Right now, from tip to toe on this guy, so these two monitors from corner to corner are 70 inches apart. Okay, so be thinking about that, 70 inches, and the total distance from tail to the wall here, which it is not touching the wall. We're probably about 5 inches away from the wall at the front of this thing, but from tail to the wall is just over 5 feet. Okay, and if it helps you guys, I am 6'1", so give you guys an idea on the size. I'm 6'1", I'm 257 pounds, and I have a great time in this thing, and I've loaded up with just about everything I have and haven't had any issues with it. So anyways, I say anyways a lot. I'm sorry. I got to work on that. Anyways, I hope that gives you guys a lot to think about when it comes to motion platforms. I didn't want to just make another showcase of a motion platform and saying how great and amazing it was. I wanted to talk about the pros, the cons, the good, the bads, the ugly. And if you guys have questions and need some honest responses, I would say that 90% of your YouTubers out there, VR Flight Sim Guy, myself, and Mark, for example, from the Flight Sim Hangar, any one of them, guys, reach out to them. If you guys have questions, we will give it to you straight. I do stand by DOF Reality. I think they've done an absolutely amazing job with the market, and I want to stress that this thing, when it was handed to me, was $2,500, I believe, that was on sale, and that the newer versions of the DOF Reality H3 are far more customizable and have a much higher weight capacity than what this one does. So you're not near as limited either. So when you think about that price going up, so is the functionality. I know, for example, that the foot plate on the newer ones move in and out as well as rotating up and down. This piece right here that holds the wheel rail goes in and out as well as up and down, and they also have what looks like, based on the pictures of it, I don't have that one, I had to install my own, but the ability to install a seat rail as well that will slide in and out. But that one I just did myself. Again, I just used a standard on Amazon, a car seat rail like you would get for your car. So anyways, I hope that this cleared up some things about motion simulation, gave you guys a few things to think about. I didn't want to show all the oohs and ahs inside the simulator, me having a great time. I wanted to give it to you straight, black and white, on the point. I hope you guys appreciate this video. If you did like it and learned something about it and gave you something to think about, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you guys like the content, don't forget to ring that bell for notification of future videos and content. As always, guys, you know the drill. Stay safe and healthy. I'll see you in the next one.